Okay, so point here is that, as I started to say, there's a lot of history behind this, and back in 1990, this was a case that went before the NAR Code of Ethics hearings and the panels and all that, and it had to do with, as that arrow down the bottom says, it was what we're looking at here. Since the request for payment of Realtor B's fee was made directly to the seller, the realtor was not in violation of that article. I'm not going through this whole thing, but that was the precedent that has to do with what we're talking about today. So Nick sent to the managers some comments about this, and this is what we're going to look at today for the next couple minutes. And as Nick says, he's keeping his promise of continuing updates regarding disclosure of agency and compensation. And he sent us some parameters to use, and that's what we're going to take a look at. He makes the point that our business is changing, and it's always been changing. It changes all the time, and we've got to adjust to succeed. And he said he'll continue to keep us updated. So talking about the ethical point of view from Bright's update to the cooperative commission field. So we're talking about two things here. One is the amount of commission that's posted in the buyer agent spot and the co-op spot on the listing, and we're also talking about compensation that a buyer may be owing to Long and Foster due to the buyer agency agreement. So these couple slides here are part of what Nick has sent. And Article 3 of the Code of Ethics states that realtors shall cooperate with other brokers, but that cooperation does not include the obligation to share commissions. That's not something new. The requirement for realtors to cooperate with other real estate professionals is a foundation of the Code of Ethics, and we all deal with that Code of Ethics in our businesses all the time. It's one of the, when you first join the Board of Realtors, whatever state you're in, one of the first classes they want new agents to go to is about the Code of Ethics. However, the requirement to cooperate does not include any requirement to compensate. We said that a minute ago, but the point there is it brings it to what we're doing with Bright. So as it says there, on August 9th, which was last week, Bright then did update its listing entry with that confusing phrase that a lot of us saw pop up on the listings last week. And the big change there only relates to the fact that before that date, Bright's rules required that the compensation in one of the fields, buyer agent or sub-agent field, had to be at least 1 cent. 1 cent. However, they've changed it, so now the compensation in those fields can be 0. That's what the change is, and that's what that phrase is talking about. So let's take that a little further. But with that new update, all offers of compensation remain negotiable. However, it's important for realtors to remain mindful of their ethical obligations. So here's an example. Let me see here. If I'm skipped, I'll come back to those. Here's an example of the buyer agency agreement, and this is the broker's fee part of it. Lots of times, and not so much as used to be, but we still see it where agents will put on the buyer agency agreement either nothing in that blank for a commission that's due or per MLS. The challenge with that is if per MLS is 0 or a penny, that's all you can collect. The buyer's not responsible for paying anymore. So the point here is that what we need to do is make sure that when we're doing the buyer agency agreement is put that 3 or 4 or 5%, whatever you normally put in for buyer agent compensation. Yeah, I'm kind of joking there, but you know, you can whatever you negotiate with that buyer can be put in there. So let me flip back to these pages here. What if a buyer instructs you? So you're meeting with the buyer, you explain to them that this document that says, yes, 3% of the purchase price, if that's what you put there, plus the flat fee. And if the seller, it's in the next line there, it says if the seller pays a portion of that, the percentage, that you don't have to pay it. So if the listing is at 3%, you don't have to pay it. But if I show you a listing that you want to see and the commission is anything less than 3% for this example, then I got to discuss that with you. And that's what this says here. If a buyer instructs their buyer's agent not to show them any properties for which the client will need to pay any portion of the compensation out of their pocket, what happens if that happens? Has anybody ever had that happen?
We added it to the sale price, somehow I got the agency.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, well, you got it. So we want to make sure that we're able to get it. So technically what it means there, because the buyer agency agreement, and if, let's say they signed it at 3% or 2.5%, if the listing says 2.5%, I mean, if the listing says 2%, that buyer has obligated themselves to pay that extra 1%. Very simple. They signed it in that agreement. So the point here is that if the buyer says, no, I don't want to see any listings that are less than that, well, that does eliminate some properties sometimes. But so long as this practice is at the direction of the buyer, the realtors are protected by the requirement from the article that we act in the best interest of their client. You know, we're not supposed to exclude listings from presenting them to a buyer and because of commission. That's the main thing. But if the buyer says, I don't want to look at that house, the commission's too low and I don't want to pay you.
So what if the buyer says what you just said? And then there's a property that would mean you don't show it and they go with everything around.
Well, they're under a buyer agency agreement that said, Kathy's question was, what if a buyer just goes on their own and meets with the listing agent because there was no compensation posted for the buyer agent? The buyer agency agreement says whether they buy the properties from your efforts or elsewhere, any other way, they owe that commission. So, that's a reminder about the agreement. So if the seller doesn't offer any cooperative compensation, or if the compensation being offered covers only a part of the fee charged by the buyer's broker, so we put 2.5%, let's say, or 3%, and they're only paying 2%. The buyer's agent and broker will need to seek any remaining portion of the agreed upon compensation from the buyer. I mean, I don't think that this, and we don't think that this is going to see a major change in what your compensation posting will be, and then all of a sudden everybody's going to put 0, because we're not changing that policy. Our policy is still 2.5% on the buy side of the transaction for buyer's agent or sub-agent, unless the seller for some reason just doesn't want to compensate a sub-agent. So the buyer's agent broker will need to seek any remaining portion of the agreed upon commission from their buyer. That's what we just said, because of the buyer agency agreement. But we have to have an obligation to make reasonable efforts to explain those terms, and we do it in the buyer agency agreement. So it's also in the standard of practice, it's also important that the buyer's agent avoid any behavior. This is important, including providing any type of inducement or offering to prepare a purchase contract on the buyer's behalf that may constitute an initiation of dealings on the subject property. So kind of what that means is that we can't go directly to the seller and say, hey, I'm not going to show this house to this buyer unless you pay more money, or we can't go to that agent and tell them that. But there's a way to do it. Let's talk about that. Realtors shall not use the terms of an offer to purchase, lease, to attempt to modify an listing broker's offers of compensation. We can't go to the other broker and say, I'm going to show this house to my buyer, but only if you change it to 2.5%. If the buyer wants to see it, the buyer agency agreement is what kicks in there. Nor make the submission of an executed offer contingent on the listing broker's agreement to modify the offer of compensation.
And can I stop for
Sure.
1 second? That is where the confusion has always lied, when people said, you can't do that. You can't ask the listing broker to pay another, and it's the additional commission. Correct, you can't, and you can't go and negotiate outside the deal. You have a buyer agency, you're supposed to abide by the buyer agency. Now, if you negotiate the deal and you know that in order to make that deal work, that person has to pay you an additional, because of their contracted deal, an additional 0.5%, then it's the buyer asking the seller to, that extra 0.5% needs to be included. This is where
As presented
as
in an
presented
offer
in the
from the
offer.
buyer.
Here,
Yes,
let's
not-
take a look at this next
It's
line
not
here.
us going and working around our fiduciary. It's us working in the guidelines of our fiduciary, and then our contractual agreement has to apply. We're so used to soft shoeing and trying to avoid that conversation with our buyer And the situation that we've always tried to go and do it the other way around. And I've said it over and over. I said it up here a couple times. I remember this agent from Carroll County that was at Century 21, and she said, I always get 3%. My buyer is always required to pay. And therefore, what she did, and knew the rules of the 1990s, which was that the buyer would be asking the seller in order to accept this deal. Now, of course, that was a more normalized market. It was not 2021, 2022, or right now in a micro market neighborhood or area. That she was able to always obtain her other 0.5% if someone was only offering 2.5 on the street.
Do you think it's gonna upset the other side, I think you just continue somebody, but seller to pay $2,000?
So that's a good question, Doug, and that's what we're getting to right now. In that blue section there, it says, however, as shown in the case interpretation, and this is what the hearing panels look at, the cases that have been held in the past. Case interpretation 1617, a buyer's agent or buyer's broker can recommend that their client ask the seller directly to pay some or all of the buyer's broker commission. We can't ask, but just like the buyer can ask if they like they want the lawnmower or they want the TVs or whatever it is, they can also put into their offer that they would like the seller to pay some or all of the buyer broker's commission. One more question? Go ahead.
So the only way that they would know that they could do that is if we suggest that. Can we allow it to suggest that?
Yes, let's take a look at that.
To our buyer.
To your buyer. That's what Nick is writing all this, our broker. And this is what and the last phrase, which is almost here on the last slide, will tell us what to do. Experienced realtors understand that the real estate industry is ever changing. Long and Foster is committed to continuing to provide timely and relevant information to support the businesses of our sales associates, and will continue to monitor this developing situation once the Bright MLS update goes into effect. It's in effect, so we've got to keep an eye on this, and Nick is going to also keep us posted on this. So in a conversation that I had with Nick, he recommended that the agent write on a blank addendum at the request of the buyer, and he says that there's no need to explain it, why you want it. It doesn't need to say, I want you, the seller agrees to pay the buyer agent more compensation. The seller agrees to pay at settlement X dollars to Long and Foster Real Estate Incorporated. Now, I have a feeling this phrase will probably evolve,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
but this is what the recommendation, pardon me?
I love Nick, but that's not exactly what I thought he was gonna come up with.
No. It's, understand, this just came out literally a week ago today, right?
Right, and you're probably not gonna need to do this tomorrow, so.
So,
Right.
so he is saying that is not Blake, Cleveland Casey, or some legal document that we have created right now. But that is the minimum understanding of what's required, okay? That as long as the parties involved are the ones requesting it inside the contract, we are protected. What we can't do is go, hey, I'm not gonna show it, this isn't gonna work out, blah, blah, blah. It has to be done in the proper ethical way along with our client and our fiduciary. Just remember that. This will change. I guarantee you, we're not gonna use that simple sentence. And I saw it this morning as well, and Nick and I did talk about it last week, because as soon as he said it on his, his Zoom, I called him right away and said, I need to know, and I called Tom Dressler, and I said, I've always felt this, but I want to hear it from your mouth. So we are able to ask directly, like you just said in the Zoom, but you glossed over for a quick second, that the buyer can ask the seller for the commission. And he said, yes. And I said, then we're gonna need language for it. I know that he put that piece of language up. It will get better. We cannot waste 4 hours on this.
Right, so let's move on to the next thing, because Guy has some really important and interesting stuff to talk about.
Because you can't.
So here's the thing.
You can't beat up Jay and I right now about this. Jay and me about this.
We'll do it later.
We'll deal with that. Go ahead.
Long and Foster's position at this time is that the seller will continue to pay commission, and that we as agents are responsible for requesting them to pay $2.5%. towards a buyer or a cooperative.
Well, and he actually used that in there, that we have not changed any of our standards. So our standards have not changed. I'm sure a lot of the traditional broker standards have not changed. Yeah, and Jay said it's gonna stay this way, you know, and we don't have to worry about it. I do think we've had the Mr. Listers out there and everybody else, so I do think somebody's gonna look at this moment and opportunity and try to seize it with some kind of angle. But we'll get to that time and handle it at that time. But right now, we need to go and deal with our clients the way we continue to deal with them, except we probably have, a lot of us done a lot more soft shoeing on the buyer agency side, and that's why we've been talking the last 6 months, how important it is to articulate, to be transparent, and to be strong, just as strong in your buyer presentation as you are in your listing presentation of your value.
We'll send those slides out.
I have a quick question. You may have covered this, but in my regular negotiation with the buyer where I'm explaining that they would cover that gap should the listing agent not, or should the seller not be paying the full 3% or whatever it is. If I've explained that well and they've agreed to that and it comes to pass and they're agreeing to pay,
Yes, that's another
I
option.
wanna ask in my offer, in the buyer's offer, let's say they wanna ask for seller assistance that would actually cover what they're paying me.
I think it's gonna depend on the lender.
And the
We're
type of
not
loan,
asking for seller
we've got
Why wouldn't we just, if the
a
buyer's
flat, so I think what Monica's trying to say is, ask for $10,000 seller help, right? And in there, that would then pay your commission.
Been done.
Go ahead,
Yeah, just keep in
but
mind that
VA, we gotta worry about
If
VA
the
right now,
buyer-
so.
if the buyer is paying any commission, that's not in the contract, we don't know about it. So you've gotta let us know. I've had a couple instances
Okay.
where a couple days before closing, someone said, hey, he's paying 1% of the commission. We gotta add it, and then you get a kind of confused or upset buyer. They thought it was worked into the numbers all along.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have to know that.
Well, and everybody knows that we're asking for this in seller assistance because then the buyer is now paying my gap.
On the settlement sheet.
Right, on the settlement
Right.
sheet, it's all on it.
Which we don't know about unless you tell us.
Right.
Well, you have to, because it needs to be on the settlement sheet for loan costs to be paid
So-
by that buyer.
So how about if
So,
this
the
comes up?
question that
if-
I got with Dan, Christina, is about the CD. So on the CD ahead of time,
Right.
that buyer gets a copy of the CD, right? And would it break down and say, this is the commission and it was paid, it's gonna be paid, so where that seller closing help is going?
On your side, on one side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's gonna be disclosed. Hold on, I think Christoph, yeah,
On VA loans, though, the buyer cannot pay any portion of the agent commission. So if you have 3% written in there and it's only 2.5%, you are forgoing your 0.5%.
Yeah, that's the.
and that is the question we've got to get to. That's why I said
They can
I
pay, but they can't be
right
forced
away
to pay.
put an asterisk about VA, because VA we still have to deal with, and I'm sure that this is gonna go to VA at some point and say, hey, there's gonna be VA buyers out there that aren't gonna be able to compete equally. You could say we're transparent and fiduciary, whatever else, but if at the end of the day, if all things being equal, I mean, is that buyer's agent gonna be willing to run around with that VA buyer, knowing if some properties are out on the street under 2.5%?
So is there going to be any verbiage in there that says that if the buyer is paying any portion of the buyer agent commission, that the house has to appraise for that additional amount?
We're talking about if the seller pays for the additional commission. If the seller pays for the additional. I mean, that's the issue is always about, if you're asking for closing help, then obviously it's gonna have to appraise, or the buyer's gonna have to come up with additional funds, which then doesn't work anyway, right? If you do the math, it's still coming out of their pocket. So again, we have to get through all these other issues, and that's why I don't want to go too long on this. That will work itself out.
So in my conversations with the buyer, when the buyer agency agreement, is being signed, so far I've always said, if there's a gap between the commission that's stated on the buyer agency agreement and what the seller offers, then, you're responsible for.
Yeah, it's
rest
a
of it.
credit against.
Can
That's-
I now also say that, in this conversation, that the buyer also has the option to ask the seller to cover the difference? Can I,
Well, that is the
That's what we
conversation.
said.
That's the whole
That's what
discussion
we
right
said.
now.
right,
I'll send these out to you.
That's why I'm saying we need to be transparent and we need to have the conversation. What if? When it's a hot seller's market and there's a lack of inventory and you tell about your value proposition, I hope some of you are saying, hey, I hear about properties before they hit the market sometimes. I'm in a good networking group. I know what's out there. I've been in this community. I've been sending out mailers, blah, blah, blah. And if, for instance, I come upon this property, you may be obligated to pay me a commission or a portion of the commission because a FSBO might say, I'm only going to give you 1% or nothing because I'm trying to win this property for you. So if I can't build this into a closing help, then you may have to pay out of pocket. So again, we need to have a better conversation.
All right, one more question.
Just hearing everything that's being said, if that's an option for the buyer to be able to ask the seller for it, why couldn't we put that in the buyer agency agreement?
Again, this is the beginning stages. That one little sentence from Nick is the beginning
That's a
stages.
temporary fix.
2024 buyer agency may have a few new lines in it, okay? I mean, that may be the case. Secondly, the wording is not going to be that short, sweet little thing that you just saw.
All right, what's on the next slide?
All right, and I knew, but we all need to, I know I sent the video out this weekend and I know it sounds like we're beating a dead horse now with the conversation. Some of you still want to hear a lot more about this and some of you are already done with it. Yeah, and I see the yawn. Just know that it's coming. Just know that, we need to be prepared for it and just know that you need to have a better, presentation like you have as a listing presentation. You're not going to be able to wing it anymore in some cases. I won't say most cases yet, but it could transition that way. All right, something different. All righty, here we go. So a little bit of national news. Did anybody see the news about Warren Buffett turned around and just bought 5 million share, almost 6 million shares of DR Horton, 152,000 shares of Lennar, 11,000 shares of NVR. Those shares are worth over $800 million. So anyway, just things to see what's going on. What do you think that means? Anybody got any input or thoughts? Or at least they're perceiving that it is, right?
It was all over CNBC.
I mean, it's a big story, isn't it? I mean, while everybody's nervous about what's happening, what does this mean for high interest rates, whatever? He's doubling down, right? And saying, I believe it's going to be strong. Again, I'm not using a crystal ball and I'm not telling Dan to put this anywhere, but this is information that so when people say, what do you think? You can always go, I don't know what I think, but Warren Buffett thinks this, so much so that he put his money here. The next thing is, we know that inventory is superficially low with the high rates, right? So what does that mean for your sellers? In a lot of the markets, it means you have a better chance of getting your house sold right now. So if your urgency is to sell and you have a need, a different angle, you're downsizing, you're moving out of state, whatever it is, we know that this is helping certain properties. More buyers that still than the inventory. And I'll show you some of the local numbers in a second. But again, we do see multiple offers going for certain properties, right? So that means the buyers are out there, but the inventory is low. Despite some areas seeing price declines, experts point out that today's home owners stand on a much more secure footing than those coming out of 2008 financial crisis, with many borrowers having positive equity in their homes. I'm going to get into that in a second. The homeowner equity is at the highest level it's been in the past several decades. So these are factors we should understand and know. Some of you are going, I already know this stuff, but we need to be able to articulate it and have some of this information. On Friday, now on a different note, on Friday, the average 30-year fixed rate jumped up to 7.19%. Over the past few months, mortgage rates have climbed back up. Financial markets which have reached a stronger than expected labor markets data, are now factoring in a higher probabilities of the Fed maintaining higher interest rates for a prolonged period. Anybody else hearing that? Anybody think it's different? It's definitely different from the conversation we had when we were talking about some of the projections from Buffini.
Well, I also have, however, heard that some of the financial experts expect that once the Fed stops raising the rate, that mortgage rates might come down to closer to 6.
Well, they think there's a big spread there too, that we've been sitting on this big spread between the yield rate. And so therefore, when it happens now, then people will ease, you know, or the banks will ease a little bit more than expected. But anyway, there's still some other factors we got to wait on, but that's projected. Now, the interesting thing, did anybody realize that 68.1% of the population out there of homeowners have 50% or more equity in their house right now? That's based on today's prices, right? So we know, but 68.1% have more than 50% equity, and a lot of 38.7% have own their homes free and clear, which also explains the reason why a lot of people were losing against other offers, because they're going, where's all this cash coming from in this world? You know, right? You would get beat out and you'd say, they had the money, there was money here, so they could do the next deal, right? So interesting to see that. Even if home prices drop, I wanted to remind myself, you've got this percentage of the population, it would take a significant drop, significant credit card debt, and giant HELOCs or whatever to cause any kind of impact on this group. So the only group that, you know, could be struggling a little bit is some of those 31%. But just to put it in perspective, the 2008 times. Then local. So now we talked about national, we're going a little local here. This is scary. And this is why we have to have better listing presentations, better conversion rates. So Harper County, this is every year as far as their units of closings. So right now there is 1,700 that have settled, which is down year to date, 665 units in a little county like Harper County, right? So very interesting. We only have 138 days left in the year. So I don't see this looking like anything near here, do you? Based on that, and this being September, October, November, December, right? So just to get it in perspective when you're talking to clients, when you're looking at this. Baltimore County. Here's Baltimore County units, 2013. Let's look at 15. And 16, we were over 12,000. Year to date, 5,267. Do you think we're going to make it to any of these units? No, 138 days left. Again, I'm giving you this visual so you can understand, articulate, and when your seller's asking you information, what discussions could you have that other agents can't have when you're sitting down at the listing table with them or having the conversations with them? What's
Do
that?
we have to get these off the web page, or can you give them to us?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I don't want, no offense, but I'm not that great at getting stuff off of Facebook.
So some of you need to go on Facebook though, please. If you don't know how, go onto it on the group page. So I will send it. We have a PowerPoint slide. We can save it and then we can send it out
Print it,
and you can print it.
I know on paper.
You can
but
have it in your little fingers. All right. So I always have to look at this. How many price reductions? Right. And again, you know, we use data to help us convince our clients to do certain things. Now, this is a little skewed, and I think I explained to you 2 weeks ago why it was skewed. 387 price reductions in 7 days, right? Now, that's not in taking into account you know, ones that went under contract. These are the active ones that are still active. 387 price reductions.
Out of how many?
Out of how many active listings? I didn't check this right today is against how many properties. I'm just telling you, 387 in the last 7 days. Then that doesn't mean they haven't had multiple price reductions. I'm just saying the last 7 days. 387 properties that are active right now have price reductions. There's hundreds that have price reductions and went right under contract right away as well. But out of these, half of them are Baltimore City. So out of the other 4 counties, they make up the difference of the rest. But Baltimore City is seeing the most price reductions. But you should go and look at your price points and your areas to see who's been doing price reductions. Maybe point that out. So if you have a $450,000 house in Ricerstown or whatever, I would pick Baltimore County properties at that price point, take a look at price reductions, be able to articulate it to your clients, see which ones got price reductions, one under contract, just a different perspective of looking at it. And that was pretty much it. I just wanted, yes.
Explain that there's low inventory and you're not selling and, you know, you've already reduced the price and still not like, I mean, it's really hard to make that argument saying, you know.
There's three factors, aren't there?
seller's market-
There's 3 factors:
I know it's
price, location, condition. It never changed. I mean, the only way it changes is if we're in a severe recession, okay? Then we could talk about the fact that you probably have it priced right. We're just trying to find that right buyer, you know, supply and demand, whatever. But if it's not the price, if the property's sitting up there and it's not getting offers and you're not going to be able to do anything to make the condition better and you can't move the building and say the property's not in such and such area, it's now in this area, then there's only one factor that does move, and that's the price. Yes.
We were all in 11 years ago, and it was all very experienced agents, and they asked what the 3 most important things in pricing a property. And it was price, 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 not price, condition, location, price, price, price. You price for location, you price for condition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to get our clients' properties in the best condition you can today, and pictures are so important.
You know, we did this thing where we talked about it. I remember the meetings we had 2017, 18, 19, and I kept talking about the grays, the backsplash, the condition, the HGTV type of buyer mindset, all that. That was the focus. Then all of a sudden, 2.5% interest rates, low inventory, and people going crazy. You didn't have to do condition as much. You could have optimized your offer and everything else, but you didn't have to. Now, again, if you're not in the perfect micro market and pricing your house right, you are definitely going to affect you're chasing the market and the ability to get a house sold right out of the gate. So these factors are back in, especially for certain properties. Don't get me wrong. If a certain school district and a certain house in a certain neighborhood has been hot since 2013 and is still hot today, you can put it on the market and you should get an offer. It might not be perfect. It might not be the highest, but you will get offers. But in certain properties, if you overpriced it, you didn't fix it up, you didn't give it the grays and backsplash, they get into the property, they're not going to be happy with it. Like Carol said, if you didn't get the right photos and have it looking perfect online, you might not even get the right amount of showings that you should have gotten. And if they don't see that activity and they don't see the buyers coming to that property, then they're not going to be fueled up to give the optimal price.
way off base.
Yeah, if you're way off base or if, you know, again, in certain markets, this, you know, the 7% interest rate has a lot more impact than other markets. So that's the other thing. The interest rates have had an effect and a chilling effect on some areas and some price points in the nation and even in our markets. But in other areas, we see it. Property goes up, everybody wants it, you know, or wants to know what it looks like and get in and see whether or not the value makes sense, price, condition, and location. Okay, so Go out and have a prosperous day. Take care. What's that?
We're not finished, yeah.
We're not, I thought we were done.
You're not the last person.
Who else? Oh my
Let's see.
God. I didn't know we were doing a whole thing today. Thought this was a quick one.
Okay, all right.
I thought with the fire agency thing. we weren't doing a big one.
Thank you. Thank you, Wade. Well, hello, everyone, and good morning, and I hope you all rested with this summer going on. I just came back from vacation, so ready to go. I want to thank you all for all your support. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please know we're there to help you in any way we can, to grow your business. I just want to talk real quick about location surveys. Question for you. Do most lenders require a location survey? No. You were first to say that. Anybody else say no? No, most lenders do not require a location survey. A location survey, as you know, is a more or less drawing of the property, the improvements on the land. It also shows if something's encroaching. It also shows easement areas. It also shows maintenance areas, which is a new thing that I've never heard. A maintenance area where the neighbor has the right to go on the property and yeah, power wash the house. Something brand new. That's what I'm talking about this. In our the exchange that we send out to every client, every buyer, it says, do you want a location survey? And what, okay, let me back up. We order a location survey as soon as we open the file because we feel it's something that you should have, okay? A lot of buyers now just say no, they don't want the location survey, which your buyer did. I said no. But see, we've already ordered it. So what we'll do is then we try to get it canceled because lots of times when we open the file, as you know, we're starting it right here, and then they fill out the exchange. You know. So bottom line is that you know, it's not your place to sell a location survey. Title company gets nothing off of it. No one gets paid anything on it, having the location survey, but it's good information for your buyer to have. A location survey costs about $270 if it's an acre or less. If it's more than that, and depending on the land and everything else, it could cost you more. So I'm not saying you should tell your buyers to get a location survey. What I'm saying to you is if they ask the question, please tell them to give us a call and we can tell them whether or not they can make a legitimate decision, you know, on whether or not they want a survey or not. I mean, lots of times they don't need it. But anyway, I just want to bring that up. So just know that the location survey does give a lot of, and we have a lot of buyers who get to the table and say, that's the most important thing. Can I see my survey? So anyway, just keep that in mind. Again, I want to thank you all for all your support. We truly do appreciate it.
If he said no, why did we end up getting it?
Because we ordered as soon as we can file.
And it was too late.
Well, no, because we couldn't cancel. That's why it was so late coming in because we went to cancel it and then they didn't get the message to cancel it. So then it got very complicated.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Because when we open a file, we literally, we feel it's important for them to have it. But that's again, their decision. Huh? Yeah, he did because, you know, what Bob had one that we didn't want to, we took the money for it because the way it worked out, but, you know. Anyway, like in a big city.
Lots of stories and transactions. Here's Dan and Christina for a quick moment.
Hey, everyone, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for your support. Oh, there we go. Just to kind of remind you, we have the Refine Your Rate program. So anyway, and this has been extended, it says March, through March of this year, but it's actually sent through the end of this year. Anyone who buys and refinances by the end of 2025, so a little over 2 years, we waive our lender fee. So it's gonna be a lot more inexpensive to refinance. And without predicting, rates, if inflation comes down, rates come down. So once they get inflation comfortably down, rates should follow. So it's still a really good time to buy, as most potential buyers know.
If that's not brought up
I asked them to refer someone to you. Is that part of your, are you telling them that?
Mhm.
Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, especially, with, like your buyer in particular, it's one of the things that, when I was competing for that loan, I mentioned that to them, like, hey, if you're gonna refi with me later, we'll waive that fee. It's an intrinsic kind of value that we have. That other companies might not have, when we're competing against other candidates. And then we also just wanted to let you know, so, as the market has gotten competitive and, there's those one-off properties that you're not able to fit in a particular bucket, or a buyer is a distinct type of buyer. We have a new broker channel, and we mentioned this a couple of weeks back, but it is active now, and we are doing loans to the broker channel. So what is happening is, if we have a buyer that doesn't fit in the conventional FHA, VA buckets, or, you have a large property, for example, like a farmette or, something like that, we can go out to these other banks or credit unions and ask them if we can do this type of loan, and they can back it for us. So this is our new broker channel. This is just an example of some of the stuff that we've done. An LTV less than 50%. So obviously this buyer is putting a large amount of money down, but their FICO was only a 593 and they had a DTI of 60%. And we were using future income to qualify. Debt to income ratio. So, that's a unique situation. 60% debt to income ratio, typically, like, we could never touch that. And in this circumstance, this bank helped this buyer, and we were able to fund that loan for the buyer. The other two down here has to do with VA. We did a $3 million VA loan with no down payment. Other banks have caps on how much they'll lend and require the buyer to do a down payment. We don't have that overlay here. And then we also approved a VA loan with a DTI of 65% on $1 million deal. So if you have things going out, I know it sounds scary, but if you have things like this, let me know, or let us know. I actually just got a VA loan pre-approved on a 70% debt to income ratio. So, obviously the buyer has to have some other what we call compensating factors. Like, for example, they have a large amount of money left over after closing, where they have, it's called reserves. So those sort of things help support a higher debt to income ratio like that. And, if you have something like that where it's just not fitting in with a particular lender, bring it to us. We'll be happy to explore the option. Just keep in mind, like, this isn't like, a day turnaround time type of thing. Like, you have to give us a couple days so that we can go out to underwriting, ask the appropriate people, collect the appropriate documentation to make sure that we can find a home for that loan. Yeah, so I mean, on VA, it's the same rates that we're offering on VA, but like, if you're doing like this type of channel, for example, yeah, you'll find that the rate will be a little bit higher, but it gets them in the door, right? It gets you to sell another home this year. So that's the idea behind it. We want to say yes more often than no.
Have you seen bridge loans more, or no, or anybody talking about them in your group?
Yeah, so, I mean, did you see that email that came out yesterday? So, another broker channel of ours did a bridge loan for a buyer, and we were able to help that buyer and do the bridge loan on their old house so that they could buy the new one. So, an overlay is just like a credit underwriting guideline that a lender imposes on the borrower for that particular loan program that maybe another company doesn't have or whatnot.
Like that, Fannie Mae might say 600 is the lowest credit score in this program. Different banks might say, we're only gonna go to 620.
Okay,
And we don't do any of that.
okay. Any buy downs?
Yes. Yeah.
I had a loan from a Cummings agent, which described to me that the person was gonna put down 20%, but they changed it to a 90% loan to value because it had a lower interest rate. Have you heard of anything like that yet?
A lower interest rate on a 90 LTV than 80. Sometimes it's slightly lower, like an
Okay.
eighth of a point.
Yeah.
But then you have PMI that gets worked into
That's
it.
what
and
I
that-
was wondering.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't
Yeah.
know if the agent, knew what he was talking about.
Sometimes it just depends on the buyer, like they come in with a 20% offer, they know they can do the 20% down to win the house, right? And then they change it, I mean, it happens all the time, they change it later, you know, to save the 10% and, you know, probably pay
If there was a
50,
3%
60
down,
bucks
they
a
were
month
paying-
in PMI that they don't mind, you know, versus putting, you know, an extra 10% down,
And a
so.
lot of them now are doing an offer with 20% down to get the offer accepted, and then they put it to the
Yeah.
10% down.
All right, thank you,
Sure.
everyone, thank you for your
Thank you.
support.
So basically, well, that's the thing.
All right, now Sarah has a couple of points, and before we end our meeting today,
Okay. Gonna work for me today.
hopefully, there you go.
Alright, first thing, I made something for your Moxie of like donation spots around Baltimore. For like people who are going from a really big house to a condo. Or people who are just moving and they're cleaning out their house and they want to be a little less wasteful. Because moving is extremely wasteful, but these are all, for the most part, keeping it within the community. So I have Roots Closet, No One's Mills. They're a domestic violence shelter run by Hopkins Nursing School, and they take women's clothing and some house items. Alternative Directions and a couple others. They do professional clothing, so people who need clothes for job interviews. Room to Grow takes some baby items, and for the things that happen because kids are a little gross, moms helping moms Facebook groups are where you can kind of get rid of the stuff that nonprofits technically can't take. Baltimore Furniture Bank takes furniture for people going from shelters to apartments, so then they don't have to worry about an extra couple grand to like furnish an apartment. And a reminder that a lot of moving companies will, for a very low price, take those things for you. And you don't have to worry about like getting a couch to those places. The animal shelters take towels, blankets, pet items, and they take lawn care items. So if you have a lawnmower because you're leaving a big house to a condo, they will take it. Because no one knows what to do with a lawnmower, usually. Scrap Beemore is a place that will take craft supplies and office supplies. And they will either donate the items to some kind of educational thing, or they have a thrift store where you can retake those items and then all the proceeds go to education. Maryland Book Bank is basically a library where teachers can go in and take whatever they want, and people of other educational organizations that aren't technically teachers. Hospitals will take gaming systems. If you can get on Netflix, they'll probably take it. You can call the Child Crisis Center and give away suitcases and backpacks. So if they're rehoming a child, they have a place to put their stuff in. And my favorite is the Tool Library in Station North. So if you have like, basically my grandpa and have like 80 screwdrivers.
I do too.
Yeah, you can donate those tools. And they, for like the sliding income for like $100 a year, you can take out up to 8 tools at a time. So if you have like a person in a condo who doesn't need a ton of stuff and stuff that like maybe you can't rent from Home Depot, you can rent from them instead. And they also do classes for like plumbing 101 for like $100. And they do a lot of work with places around like West Baltimore that are teaching financial literacy to get people who are stuck in rent situations to go to owning homes, and then how to maintain those homes. So they're really good.
Will you email that?
Yeah, and the weekly emails. They get sent out to like roughly 6,800 agents. We have a pretty high open rate. And usually close to 3,000 people open them a couple times. So they're actually very high for this industry. Usually you're really lucky at 25% open rate.
Yeah, so what happened was we switched from constant contacts to active pipe. And I think everybody's already made constant contacts through junk mail, like to block those type mail. So active pipe people haven't thought about, so when it comes across to them, it's not the same. So I definitely saw a difference when we canceled doing constant contacts about a year and a half ago. And you guys notice it looks completely different, it's clear from the mobile view. But what happens is it's not seen the same way as the constant contacts. So that's a good thing.
And I send out like 5 types, usually the brokers, the just listed, open houses. I do a separate one for like Roland and featured listings. As long as it's in bright by 9 AM that day, I will see it. And I want it in by 9 AM because if it's newly added, there's not going to be everything updated on our end. So it's really necessary to give things time to process through Long and Foster. And it will be added if it's in bright, has a working website. And you don't need to tell me unless if there's something very specific.
We're very urgent. If you have an
We're very
urgent
urgent.
client and something we need to deal with, please let all of us know, CC me, CC Saloy, whatever, and say, this is a high priority, this person needs some tender loving care, something was missed, something was wrong, whatever.
Yeah.
Then definitely make sure you're pointing it out.
But if you just put something in bright, you don't have to tell me. Like, I'll see it.
Okay.
I get a lot of that. And they are in day order. So the open houses go Saturday, then Sunday. So if you have something on Sunday, it's gonna be below the Saturday ones. And then they go by price order, the most to least expensive. Sometimes people don't look far enough down and they're not super happy. Then the rentals. And then if it's coming soon and it's expected by Sunday, it's going to be added. If you only have like one picture of the outside, then I might wait until next week, but it's going to be there, but it's going to be all the way at the bottom. So if you want to jump up to the top of the list, have it on by Thursday.
And have 4 pictures.
Have more than pictures of the front of the house. If it's not on the email, probably because the pictures are on your phone and they're probably have that like white halo around a window and a very dark couch or a dark kitchen. I think personally, if someone's gonna put down a life savings amount of money on something, you need to respect that and make sure that they have the same experience as someone paying a lot of money on a house, because they're paying a lot of money too for them. And if it was past the deadline, I probably don't know it's on there. So you need to tell me if it's on there. That's maybe why it's not on there. And is everything correctly listed? Like, is everything working? Are the dates correct? Sometimes it's not correct, and that's why it's not on there. So you have to go back and check and make sure it actually is properly done. Or else I'm gonna skip over it because.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. That's some great information. I think that was the last slide, right?
Okay.
Thank you. Anybody have a new listing you want to tell us about this morning, real quickly? Nobody's telling us. Okay. Well, then that's it for today.
All right, this time go out and have a prosperous day.